Welcome to the CTA podcast. Join us as we critically examine the ideological capture of the psychotherapy field. Here we discuss better, common humanity proposals for a fairer society. Our discussions are thought-provoking, and our guests are from diverse backgrounds, bringing unique perspectives to the table. This is the CTA podcast with your hosts Jaco van Zyl and Christine Siefen. Welcome everybody. Unfortunately, Christine won't join us today, but I'm sure I will be capable enough to handle the fort without her capable hands just for today. I am delighted to have as my guest Professor Jon Mills. Jon Mills is a Canadian philosopher, psychoanalyst, a retired clinical psychologist. He's also an internationally recognized scholar, teacher, cultural critic, and award-winning author. I have two of his volumes that I'd like just to show our audience. The first one is Psyche, Culture, World, Excursions in Existentialism and Psychoanalytic Philosophy, published by Routledge. And the other volume, his penultimate volume, as I understand it, is Critical Theory and Psychoanalysis from the Frankfurt School to Contemporary Critique. This is a must-read with several contributors, very, very knowledgeable scholars in the area, giving us insights into how critical social justice, the way we understand it today, seeped into psychoanalysis, something Janine Chasseguet-Smirgel calls Freudo-Marxism. That is most certainly a must-read. And his most recent book is End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate. Jon, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jaco.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. You're welcome to maybe just say something about your most recent book, End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate. What is that about?
Well, yes, it's a pessimistic speculation about what is the fate of our humanity. It's coming out with Roman and Littlefield as a general interest trade book, so I'm quite excited about it. It's I'm attempting to address many different concerns that we face in the world today, and given what's happening in our contemporary societies, it's troublesome to see. But nevertheless, we need to have these important conversations, and I hope to do just that with this next book.
Look, I'm delighted to have you here. You are a friend of the Critical Therapy Antidote organization. We've published some of your articles. We've also published some of, or linked on our website to some of your videos that you've published on YouTube, because we do find ourselves in a time of turmoil. And it's interesting to see how different contributors from different starting points more or less arrive at the same endpoint around these issues. Contributors to the CTA, of course, which is interesting, and it shows a type of a convergent evidence base that we're building as a commentary and a critique of what is taking place around us. We tend to turn to our sages in times of turmoil. Religious institutions, for instance, academic establishments, philosophers, psychologists, psychoanalysts. My goodness, what has happened to psychoanalysis?
Well, it's going through a facelift, and it's troubling what it's looking like. It's like it's got a botched job at the doctor's office.
Yeah.
So psychoanalysis has always been my first love, and to see it, disintegrate the way it has the last few years, particularly last 2 years, is why I've been concerned and why I've been engaged in my writing on critiquing what's going on with the introduction of, critical social justice ideology. Um, so there's so many different elements of how this is creeped into the field
Right.
that where do you want to begin?
Okay. Let's open it up. When you say that there are so many different entry points into the field, what are you thinking of?
Well, when I first, I guess, became aware of the larger cultural wars, I didn't think that they had really infiltrated the field of psychoanalysis. Um, Perhaps it hasn't in terms of the international community, but it most certainly
Right.
has within, the American institutions. And I remember reading your really fascinating article in Merriam-West, and that's what got me into, doing some research, looking at how certain ideologies are shaping the narrative of what we talk about today. So
Yeah.
it seems like everything is being seen through the lens of race and gender and power differentials and decolonial theory. And I think that there's a certain danger with that, because everything gets interpreted through a very narrow projective lens.
Yes.
And so when I started encountering it, it was after the Donald Moss article in JAPA that I think shocked many of us, and also shocked the public, given that when you have an article that's published that wasn't even peer reviewed, and it hits the national newspapers when you allow something such as a white baby's born racist when it falls from the
Yes.
womb, it is quite shocking. And
Whiteness as a parasite.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, even evoking the anti-Semitism of that historical use of the term parasite.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't surprising on some level, even though it was, that Moss would receive death threats, and the American Psychoanalytic has to close down its offices because of a bomb threat. I mean, it was it was not something just to brush away, and it affected a lot of us, thinking that this is not what the field, which is already struggling in terms of its public image, needs for people to be thinking about psychoanalysis devolving into this way of thinking.
It's almost as if the field that's supposed to help us think about these things, when we observe certain trends, you're referring to the culture wars, instead of instinctively participating and strengthening the division and the tribalism in the culture wars, to think about it, to reason around what is actually going on, what is spilling over out of the mass unconscious, and maybe we can talk around it as opposed to participating in the division. We see someone like Donald Moss instigating tribalistic division, and those bomb threats, I suppose, were precisely the type of response they were looking for, to almost legitimize what they were trying to say, as if that had pre-existed. Well, it may have pre-existed, but it was also incited. Something that we wouldn't expect psychoanalysts to do. You would expect that from a bad faith actor, an instigator of conflict, not so.
Well put. It was certainly a faux pas at the very least. But there are many people who do believe that psychoanalysis has neglected the social realm and has neglected social justice issues. And so this was kind of ripe for these types of ideas to be put out there.
Neglected the social realm. It sounds like a carte blanche to say and to do whatever they like, as opposed to carefully thinking about what might be taking place in the social realm.
Yeah, well, I mean, psychoanalysis historically has never neglected the social collectives. Freud was very instrumental in talking about, group or mass psychology and how we can't separate social psychology from individual, and leading to a number of disciplines such as social work to embrace how we can apply this to greater social justice issues. So nothing like that's new. It's just the way it's being reframed in today's world. So again, when we start to essentialize people based upon the color of their skin, when we insist that certain identities, let's say gendered identities, can be simply socially constructed, like we see in the trans movement. I mean, this then starts to introduce, sensitive issues. And I agree with you that they could be analyzed in a non-emotionally contagious way.
Yes.
And rather than to immediately start, pointing fingers at an oppressor and a victim, and create a false binary that doesn't exist in the real world.
I'm thinking of the writings of Vamik Volkan and some other contributors who have written on various different conflicts around the world. The Middle Eastern conflict, for instance, the conflict in Kosovo, the conflict in Cyprus, for instance, between the Turks and the Cypriots, in Ireland, who did apply an analytic lens to understand what was actually playing out at a collective level. And one of the things that Vamek Volkan said was for an analyst to become a group analyst and to actively engage in some of these disputes, you need to be acutely aware of your own biases, but also you need to try and reduce association and identification with the groups involved. So in the past, it would have been easier, I will justify that now, easier compared to now, because in the past, one would say, okay, there's a Cypriot, or those are the Cypriots, or those are the Turks. I'm a Brit, for instance. I'm a South African, for instance. I have no skin in the game, racially, culturally, even. As a group analyst, I can engage these two groups or representatives of these two groups and become aware of my own biases. At least there is this restraint, this restriction by virtue of my non-identification with either of the two groups. The issue that I have with critical social justice is that it introduced a way of thinking about these conflicts with a frame, using a frame that's fungible, where we're no longer just thinking about specific identities. I mean, racial identities or cultural identities, because it's fungible, and we talk about oppressor and oppressed. Any identity could be slotted into this scheme, which cripples the group analyst's ability to try and stay as neutral and as self-aware as possible. Critical social justice, in my opinion, has even ruined group analysis.
Well, I mean, I think it depends upon the context of how this is engaged. So, for instance, having an open discussion where we can explore issues around race, anti-racism, um, gendered identities, intersectionality, all the lingo that people use. Group identities are not that compartmentalized. I mean, how could you possibly represent, how could you be a part of a group identity to begin with? as if everyone's the same. It makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, we are very, multifaceted, unique individuals that have multiple identifications and disidentifications. We have our own emotional prejudices. We have our own valuation practices that we and judgments that we value over others, and yet we have collective shared identifications. There, you can't even talk about a culture without importing, all its fundamental historicities. Yourself from South Africa. I mean, like this,
Yeah.
for me to be collapsed into a category of white.
Yes.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, given the fact that there's no that whiteness doesn't exist on the genome, and I might historically part of my family might come from Wales and Ireland. I don't remotely identify with this remote aspect of my ancestral lineage. So to force people into a little box and then say that you represent all those people is not only a category mistake, it's an informal fallacy of logic. It's also offensive to people. It's offensive to be reduced or essentialized to one thing, let's say skin color.
Yes.
We have to be much more nuanced in the way we understand collective and individual identities.
But when something as simplistic and again fungible is introduced, such as oppressive versus oppressed, and viewing interactions purely through that lens, you will be running into trouble because you will be dismissing and disavowing what is obviously in front of them at the preference of an ideology that they cling to as if it were a religious confession.
Well, it does seem to be an article of faith. You believe in my belief or you don't. And it's hard to have conversations with people when it's that black and white.
So you spoke about Donald Moss. In one of your videos, you also refer to a major shakeup that took place in the American Psychoanalytic Association. We published an email that was distributed among the members of APSA saying that Jerry Salkowitz, the former president of APSA, was resigning as the president, but he would remain as a member. I got the impression that you had some intimate knowledge as to what actually took place there. Would you like to fill in some of the major gaps we have in our understanding?
Well, sure, for what I know about. Just to clarify, I'm actually not a member of APSA. I'm associated with people who are. Much of this had been fueled by the Lara Sheehi scandal. And, I wrote about a few articles on the Division 39 and the controversy in general, as well as how that trickled into the American Psychoanalytic membership. Basically, what has happened is that Sheehi has a number of supporters. She is being branded as an outspoken anti-Semite, and she even recently was posting on her Instagram, supporting the terrorist group Hamas and finding justification for their massacre of the recent Israeli invasion. So you could see how polarizing the individual she has been. So she is also an intelligent woman who knows how to play politics well. She's introduced major divisions in the Division 39 membership lists, and largely there's a contingency of social justice people that are backing her. And this has led to divisions of people who can't support her anti-Semitism, for instance, and creating divides. There are others that just uncritically think that it's okay to take a view toward this liberation struggle that Palestine is involved in, and yet all nuances of what it means to Israelis to have a homeland. What does it mean to be a Zionist, even if you are radically opposed to the far right politics of the Netanyahu government, and is very threatened by this that people who don't support that worldview, that don't want innocent citizens to suffer or die.
Right.
But all of this gets thrown out as if Israel does not have the right to exist. It should be wiped off the face of the map. It should be overgrown by Palestinians, who of course would wipe out a Jewish state, and Hamas's charter of the moral duty under God to murder Jews. So, I mean, like, how can you support that organization and look at yourself in the mirror? But if it's all under the rubric that we have been oppressed, you are the colonizer, that you should be defeated, then we look at things as acts of war, as acts of justification for murder. So this has polarized many people in psychoanalysis, and as you would imagine, it's pitting Jews against Arabs, or woke white people who want to come in and be allies on the right side, as if there's as if morality is that simple, that you have a clear good guy and a clear bad guy. I mean, the splitting and the reductive thinking is so it's beyond even being, you're dumbfounded by it at this stage. And not only that, how is it that people are so readily quick to jump on the moral bandwagon and with such hubris and take these stands, like we see on university campuses, almost like acting out children who, just simply want to, provoke a fight just because it feels good in the moment. But these have radical consequences on other people. So, we don't want to support any type of extreme thinking. But whatever group it is, we don't want to support hate. But the minute you start to introduce a divide between groups, one is going to be the hater and the other, the hated. And it's just a shame that our discipline, that we know how psychological, and unconscious processes work and defenses work, that we wouldn't want to say, whoa, settle down here. Let's have a dialogue before we jump the gun into these accusations. And so the other thing is that rather than analyzing, rather than trying to understand, rather than taking that evenly suspended, hovering attention and looking at things holistically, we're quick, we're quick to jump in and then want to change things, such as society needs to be changed from its fundamental foundations. And why are we jumping the gun to that? I mean, these are complex issues. So just to think, we just throw things out such as, if you're white, you're a white supremacist. If you're not doing anti-racism advocacy, or to use the lingo of allyship and things like this, then that means you're a racist. I mean, whoa, where do we even begin a conversation when you're thrown into that category?
Yeah, it's so absolutist. You mentioned the word splitting, and it is a very primitive type defense mechanism, and I think the old Freudians or psychoanalysts would have called it regressive paranoid illusions. And you see the paranoia, you see the extreme defensiveness, and how within their phenomenology, within their subjectivity, you can sense that it truly feels so real to them that they are right and they are justified to do literally whatever is necessary to defend themselves, and that everything is fair play and could be justified by virtue of that victimhood, such that even the murder of innocent children, elderly, newlyweds, people who, and even immigrants who have no skin in the game, would be justified for the cause. There is, like you said, there is no room to negotiate, to think, to reason when the paranoid illusion and even delusion, the micropsychosis, has taken over the mind so exhaustively. And it doesn't just happen, it happens incrementally. It happens when one feels the urge and the pleasure of self-idealization and moral self-justification to creep in so exhaustively that it transforms you into an anti-Semite. Sadly, there have been high-profile psychoanalysts who've been instrumental in spreading this way of thinking, which is just so disappointing.
Yeah, very much. So what that did was fuel divisions, because basically Donald Moss, who was the chair of the program committee for the conferences, had invited Sheehi to present, and he didn't clear that. He did not get permission from the executive to do that. And then when he presents it like this, Kerry Solkowitz has to address that as the president. So he decides to take a reasonable stand by saying it would not be good to have her present, even though it's portrayed as she was invited and it was rescinded, but it really didn't come from the executive themselves. So it was a coup that was starting to form within the membership, going up to the top, and Solkowitz, writes a letter on behalf of the membership saying that given her vocal anti-Semitism, it would be ill-advised to have her speak, and that's when all the different identities come out of the woodwork. So if you have a different racial identity than Caucasian or Jewish, even though I just absolutely abhor referring to people by the color of their skin, this is what we got these days. Like when you say BIPOC, I mean like everybody's grouped in the same thing, right? Like a black and an indigenous person is a lot different than, let's say, a person of color from India. I mean, but they're all thrown in, lumped in the same.
They're identical now.
Soup. They come and they were very vocal on the listserv. And Dorothy Holmes, who's part of the Holmes Commission for Racial Equality, goes on record to say this was a racist act on the part of Solkowitz and the executive, and that they should all resign. And basically you just get beat up and ganged up on by people claiming you're a racist with no justification whatsoever. And Holmes, speaking on behalf of the whole committee, which they must have, of course, agreed, is making accusations that the entire American psychoanalytic community is racist, without even having the results of their commissioned report come out. The conclusion's already baked in. And so you could imagine then how the listserv just becomes, just set ablaze. And everyone coming out of the woodwork who's saying that, you need to resign, that everybody has no confidence, and it's racist, and da 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 da. So that led to a series of internal disruptions and negotiations. Sulkowitz felt he's being unjustly tried and burnt at the stake, and he resigns, and good riddance. And before he goes, he just wants to make sure everybody knows how anti-Semitic these people on the board are, how unreasonable they have been, even though I've supported this type of extremely expensive research. Over $300,000 they spent. And that's only a little bit of the knowledge I have. I don't have privilege to everything, but I do have privilege. Can you imagine buying a Bentley with that money, a small house in certain parts of the United States, or wherever you live, to justify a completely biased report where the conclusions were already determined before anything was even undertaken. Right. So now we have massive identity politics that are pressurizing members, and you have people who are just terrified. You could say that they're cowardly, you could say they're gutless. Let's just not moralize it. They're afraid. They're afraid of speaking out. The majority think this is ridiculous, it shouldn't go on, but they're going to get canceled. They're going to affect their referrals, the reputation. They do not want what happened to me, and that is Mills is the racist. And so I don't want to be put in a position where I'm going to be attacked by my colleagues or accused by minority identity groups. So they remain silent, but they've let a massive takeover happen, and to the point where I could no longer support Division 39 and APA. It doesn't even remotely stand for my values. No. So why would I? And yet the group gets to feel some sense of victorious glee and popping champagne.
Oh yes, celebration, and that is the final stage that Pamik Volkan describes in this narcissistic group regression, is celebration over defeating the demonized, the scapegoated other. And it is shocking. Thank you for correcting me. I said Jerry Sulkowitz. It's Kerry Sulkowitz. So thank you for correcting me there. And you're right. Janine Chesseguet-Smegel also speaks of our paranoid core. We all have a paranoid core. We all have a perverse core. And under certain circumstances, that core can be activated, especially under circumstances where the ego gets suspended and gets diluted into a type of a mob group ego, such as what has happened there. And it was through mob justice that they chased him out with burning torches and hay forks. It is just, again, so disappointing to see that it's happening in psychoanalysis. And people are scared. I can just imagine. People are scared. But Jon, you're a psychoanalyst. I'm psychoanalytically trained. We know that nothing will adequately satisfy the greedy urges of the envious infant. That is why we know that so many institutions have incorporated critical social justice into their system, into their policies, for instance, are battling. They're battling with internal division, with conflicts, the inability to adequately resolve conflicts. So with internal relationships, we as psychoanalysts know that this would happen. No organization will survive it. No society will survive it. Not the destructive greed, not the perverse justification for that greed, not the paranoia that drives it. Why do people still think that we can build understanding among ourselves? Those people, those persons are not interested in being understood. They're interested in conquering the scapegoat. What don't they see?
Well, that's a big question. On one hand, to see it within our field is really, disheartening. To see it in the masses is not surprising. But one has to ask, how many people really have had their own treatment? I mean, most of the social justice folk are not psychoanalysts. They're identified with maybe a psychoanalytic sensibility on some level, but they haven't. You're not talking about somebody full-fledged here. And so have they appropriately or adequately looked at themselves? Have they been in treatment? I don't know. A lot of individuals who have no qualms about saying whatever comes to mind as if they're in a analytic session on a listserv, or telling people that they're, whatever it may be, a racist, and that we live in white supremacist society, and that everything's systemic racism. And well, that's not very conducive to having a discussion, is it? You've already labeled people. So I think a lot of folks probably have personality disorders. They have and we know that personality disorders, whatever you want to call them, narcissists, borderline, psychopathic structures.
Absolutely. Well, it goes without saying.
They've had their own developmental traumas, and we have to be able to suspend the pathos in order to see they've suffered. But have they really worked through their own suffering? Have they come to realize that we can't just paint all of society with a paranoid brush, and to think that to do so is not only justified, but it's morally the right thing to do. And then we have a twisted distorted warped view of what it means to be an ethical human being, based upon simple binaries of right and wrong, as if justice is that simple. But getting back to what can we do? I mean, even though I my first book was called The Ontology of Prejudice, and I'm very much interested in healing, divisions in group identities. However, we have to admit, like you said, if we have a paranoid and a perverse core, we also have our own, prejudices. Every human being does, and it's becoming aware of them. It's becoming aware of our, shadow projections onto others, and owning what's, due to our own conflicts, our own complexes and inadequacies that we foist onto others without reflection, as well as I think we also have a primal need for recognition.
Yes.
And I'm
beautiful.
I'm a fan of Hegel's recognition theory, which has been taken up in contemporary third generation Frankfurt school thinking, with Axel Honneth in particular.
Okay.
That there's a value to wanting to have mutual recognition. And if we can have a mutual recognition, we can have a shared empathy and compassion for others. And it is, at least in theory, possible. So why would we not want to open ourselves up to having, some mutual understanding and harmonization of, more healthy forms of relatedness, than to have the need for the enemy, the need for the whipping boy, to spit on and to smack whenever we need to take a baseball bat to.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. And for us to enter into that relationship where we're willing to recognize the other and what the other is trying to signal, trying to communicate to us, we need to also assume the depressive position, to be ready to also appreciate that the other person has a center of consciousness. And because there's a center of consciousness, that is also the locus of suffering. And that suffering is not a source of pleasure, perverse pleasure to me. That suffering is a source of concern to me. And while we're trying to do that, and while we're trying to projectively position the other into a place where they can recognize their own guilt, and while we can reassure that that repair is possible, it's not just condemnatory, even though from the other side there might be just pure condemnation and wiping the scapegoat off the face of the earth. There are practical limitations here, Jon. I mean, just take, for instance, and I wanted to take a huge leap, not because I'm comparing ABSA to this situation, but because this is a practical reality that might teach us something. When we engage in someone that is so destructive that they're a danger to society, one removes them out of the realm where destruction is within their reach, and within a different setting where people might not suffer as much from their destruction, one tries to start rehabilitating, engaging with them, and finding out what are those core needs, and could we think about those needs? Could we find constructive ways of fulfilling those needs, or just talking about those needs as opposed to just acting out the greed? That is in a forensic setting, for instance. I mean, it can be applied in a military or a quasi-military setting too. But to give the other resources and to allow them the pleasure to destroy those resources at will, to reinforce their ability to destroy those resources, just removes the possibility of them realizing how much they have destroyed. And I think the condemnatory guilt might be so much that they might not have the ego strength to carry that guilt and to try and repair. They'd much rather commit to ultimate destruction. I mean, I'm giving you a Kleinian formulation here of the envious instincts. So my question is, do the psychoanalytic institutions have much resources left that could be trampled upon by people who have no interest or desire to understand or to be understood?
I think that's going to take a strong leadership position. Most people individually are going to say, yeah, I'm not going to hang around with these people. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to support them anymore. I'm not going to go to conferences. I'm not going to put my dues in this kind of membership because they are not they don't have the values that I have. But it's at the structural level of the top. How do the people in charge act? So if you look at Division 39, eight of those board members have signed the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. They've joined as board members, signing to support Shiite. And it's troubling when people are acting on behalf of not only the division membership, but of the APA, have taken a political stance, violating the IRS requirements that a 501c nonprofit remain non-political. Those folks have clearly overstepped their bounds, in my view. So that's why none of the leadership wanted to touch the hot potato. We would imagine that, even today, there's been pressures from a number of groups that Shihi should go. And now that she's even more adamant and doubling down on her support for Hamas after the program that just happened. And so if APA does not force her off, then they are complicit with anti-Semitism and a terrorist intent to wipe out a whole peoples.
Yeah.
How embarrassing. I mean, so it's unbelievable. It'd just be like, okay, I'm going to go along with it, just like, Hitler's party when it was rising to power. Let's say nothing. We don't want to upset anybody here.
Yeah.
So the APSA people are, first of all, you can't get anything done when you have a board of 50 people. I mean,
Oh, no.
50 people, come on. So, but the leadership could say these are certain things are just not cool. They're not permitted. And we have to take a stand as an executive, as leadership. And like, I would much rather, and I would have wished this on for Carrie Solkowitz, that I would much rather have the membership kick me out than me resign over over this issue, just because you have you have majority people who have certain beliefs, a minority people who don't. The sheer number of taking just a utilitarian, pragmatic approach to this, which suggests that the greater number should be respected. Having said that, people are hell-bent on staying because they are convinced they're right, such as Sheehi. So she's convinced that her worldview is the correct one. And if we don't believe in her worldview, then we are evil. And it's just, can't get my head around it.
To a group of people, not only to individuals, but to a group of people who've actually banded together around an ideology that is extremely moralizing, but also extremely destructive. A leadership that they have condemned, and they have a leadership that they've targeted for destruction and dismantling, will get the same treatment from them, whether they're part of that organization or whether they're removed from that organization. And I hope the leadership will think about this. I can imagine that they want to be the leadership who say that they're committed to negotiation, to deliberation, to talking about these things, to throwing resources around pseudo research, etc., etc. I can imagine that they want to be a type of surviving mother. But these are destructive, terrible infants, and they need to prove to these terrible infants that they are not the non-surviving mother. They will survive. As with the example I gave you, the forensic example, the military example, sometimes survival is not possible in reality. Either way, non-survival will be the ultimate outcome. Either as the scapegoat, perpetually having feces projected into you, on the one hand, or as the hated father who said, enough, enough, we will no longer stand for this destruction. If you're so convinced to be right, you establish the, critical social justice, or the critical psychoanalytic Association of America. And you educate us. We return to the principles that have built psychoanalysis, the principles that have helped psychoanalysis survive certain periods of turmoil. You don't want to live by these principles because you consider these principles to be racist, maintaining the status quo, etc., etc. We know all those buzzwords. In that case, since we're in a position of a deadlock, these values are irreconcilable. You go your way, we will respect you. We will go our way, but we will no longer stand and take these fecal projections from you anymore. We're drawing a line in the sand. I don't think psychoanalysis will survive unless someone takes a stand. It hardly
Yeah.
survived in Third Reich Germany with the Goering Institute. And I've said it, under the Third Reich, psychoanalysis was Nazified. Of the Soviet Union, it was Marxified. And in contemporary times, psychoanalysis is wokeified. And it's a shame, as if we've forgotten everything of our past. But we want to please. They want to be saviors of these terrible children. They're committed to being the invulnerable mother. In reality, you cannot be the invulnerable mother to certain people.
Yes. Well, you're not needing to convince me of that.
Yeah, well,
I think the reality principle has rung its bell, and there's some of us that are taking stands, are not going to tolerate a mass psychotic way of thinking,
no,
or some participation mystique in someone else's illusions. We want to return to what's sensible, what is civil, what is good prudence, what Aristotelian way of relating to politics would be about.
yeah,
And but it does also mean that we have to engage where people are cognitively. And if we're not able to even agree upon ground rules, um, or we can't agree upon styles of thinking that aren't delusional, then we have a big problem here. And a lot of people do not want to be the therapist to the social activists.
no,
There's absolutely not. I'm not there for that. If the savior mother or that's identifying with their suffering wants to ally and be with them, fine. But let's not burn down the house. And I think if history has anything to show us, that there'll be a time when this way of thinking is going to be antiquated. It's going to be
yes,
marginal. It's there's leading toward their own self-destruction by their extremism in thinking. And when people no longer going to buy into this delusional ideology, is when we're going to see more splits and
yes,
splinter groups and things like that. But I also think that people are being forced, that they have to take a stand, whether it be
yes,
politically or morally, against false attributions and just fantasies that cannot be substantiated by empirical facts.
yeah,
Um, and unfortunately, when you've got a whole area of academia that's been co-opted by postmodern thought, where that wants to deny everything from objective reality to universals to what is considered to be truth and reality and things like this. I mean, and everything's about social construction or about a narrative way of telling a story, or about everything is about my own subjective experience that is then objectively applied and falsely generalized to everyone. And not only that, and you have the moral obligation to mirror my experience
yes, yes, to obey it.
and validate it without question. That's when this is when clashes happen.
Absolutely,
Uh, and
absolutely,
there's going to be more clashes. That's just inevitable.
yeah. So you see a schism coming.
Well, I think there's a schism already,
Okay.
whether it be a a fracturing of the field. I doubt it's going to be that bad, but who knows? I mean, sheer numbers of people are likely to continue to do what they do, think what they think, teach how they teach, practice how they practice, because they don't have, they don't have to adopt this political activism. And others will remain silent and allow atrocities to happen in their institutes because they don't want to be canceled. Others will resign in protest because they cannot, in good faith, allow themselves to align with this ideology. New forms of memberships might emerge, and you have new groups.
Yeah, institutions, parallel institutions. Yeah.
I think the writing, meaning the people who write articles and books, are going to continue to do so.
Yes.
You do have certain woke journals and editors who allow people to publish their skewed views, but that's the politics of publishing anywhere. We all know what that's about. Do you get a sympathetic editor? Do you get blind review peers that are sympathetic to your point of view? These are all games that we have had to go through for any of us who's been successful in publishing in academia.
Jon, it will be interesting to see how these things play out. It will be interesting to see how the scene of the world will change. I think next year, this time, we will be having, in some ways, similar, but in other ways, different discussions, because things are changing, they're changing fast. I think it was before I recorded our session when you said, we need to keep talking. And I think that is the key. We need to keep talking. We need to keep thinking. Talking is an extension of thinking. Writing is a way of putting your thoughts down in a more organized fashion. And that is what we will commit to do. And I hope that is what you will commit to do.
Well, yes, that's one of my passions. So I will try.
Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your courage above all. And hope to see you soon again.
Thank you for your graciousness. Appreciate it, Jaco.